Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Josiah Neely. I'm a policy analyst at TPPF's Armstrong Center for Energy and the Environment. I'd like to welcome you all to today's panel, Energy in Texas, Mastering the Master Resource. Last month, Time Magazine was selecting their Person of the Year. They had 10 finalists, 10 people who had shaped the year 2013 the most. And the list included President Obama, Ted Cruz, Edward Snowden, Miley Cyrus. I'm not entirely sure how she made it on there. And of course, the eventual winner was the Pope Francis. There was a name that was missing from that list, though, that I would argue was definitely a finalist for Person of the Year, and quite possibly the most significant person of 2013, who's a Texan, and that, of course, would be George Mitchell, who passed away last year. So, George Mitchell did not invent hydraulic fracturing. That technology has been around for a long time, but through his long efforts, we're able to figure out ways to economically get access to large energy resources, both in Texas and in the United States. And if you were at the lunch, you heard Representative Turner talk about, trying to meet your dream, even if not everybody sees your dream. And I think that is definitely the case for Mr. Mitchell. He spent more than a decade, and I believe it was $6 million of his money trying to get that process to work, when a lot of people thought you're never going to be able to economically recover all these energy resources. But he did it, and now we're living in George Mitchell's world. So what does that mean for Texas, for the United States, for the world? What does it mean economically? What does it mean environmentally? What are the challenges that we have to deal with, and what are the benefits? We have assembled to talk about that today a very distinguished panel. We'll begin with Commissioner David Porter. Commissioner Porter was elected to a 6-year term, the Texas Railroad Commission, in 2010, and he serves on the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission as the official representative of Texas, and as Governor Perry's official representative on the Interstate Mining Compact Commission. After Commissioner Porter, we'll hear from Representative Keffer, who in 1997 became the first Republican to ever represent District 60 in Texas. Representative Keffer is the chairman of the House Energy Resources Committee. He's also serves on House Natural Resources and other committees. And finally, we'll hear from Cyrus Reed. Cyrus is the Conservation Director and Acting Chapter Director for the Lone Star Sierra Club. And Cyrus has a PhD in geography from the University of Texas. And so we'll hear from each of the panelists, and then we'll have some period for Q&A. So with that,
hello, I'm David Porter, Texas Railroad Commissioner. It's an honor to be here today, and I would like to thank the Texas Public Policy Foundation for the invitation to speak with you all. As you know, this is a very exciting time in the energy industry. Because of shale plays and the use of hydraulic fracturing, America is enjoying an energy renaissance. The U.S. is on track to become the top oil producer in the world by 2015, surpassing Russia and Saudi Arabia. And in October, we produced more oil than we imported for the first month in nearly 2 decades. Texas plays a huge role in American energy production, accounting for close to 40% of U.S. crude oil and around 30% of our country's natural gas production. Roughly half the drilling rigs that are running in the world right now are running in the U.S. And approximately half the drilling rigs in the U.S. are here in Texas. So a quarter of the rigs in the entire world that are drilling right now are drilling in Texas. I think that's an astounding statistic when you stop and think about that. And just for example, on average, each drilling rig operating in Texas results in $1.5 to $2 million just in sales tax each year. Oil and gas activity in our state has anchored Texas' economy during a nationwide recession, and it allowed us to recover at a much faster rate than the rest of the country did. Texas has regained more than twice the number of jobs lost during the recession, with at least a third of this rebound being attributed to investments in oil and gas. Because of shale plays and the use of hydraulic fracturing, 2013 state severance tax collections, which are based on the value of oil and gas production, set an all-time high at $4.5 billion, accounting for about 10% of all state tax collections. Of that $4.5 billion, $2.5 billion went to the state rainy day fund. However, and I think this is one of the things we were addressed on the panel topic, in my opinion, the biggest threat to the continued success of the energy industry is the overreaching arm of the federal government. I am sure most of you have noticed that the Obama administration seems dead set on waging war against fossil fuels. We have all witnessed the blatant overreach of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And now we've got another agency that's really active in this area, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Their latest attempt is an attempt to list the lesser prairie chicken as an endangered species. This particular bird is found in Texas, in the Panhandle and the Permian Basin. And if it is listed as an endangered species, it will adversely impact the oil and gas industry. Permian Basin is responsible for, used to be half of the oil production in our state. Probably slipped a little bit percentage-wise in the last year or two. That production represents about 14% of total U.S. production, and you include the New Mexico part of the Permian Basin, and you're back getting close to 20% of total U.S. production is coming from the Permian Basin. What that means in real concrete terms is the chicken could become a national security threat if it's listed. Fortunately, Texas has been working diligently with other state wildlife agencies, along with oil and gas producers and stakeholder groups in the area, to develop a conservation plan as an alternative to listing the chicken. Now, this plan recently received an endorsement from the federal government, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to list it. This collaborative effort to produce a range-wide conservation plan proves that this issue is not just imperative to the oil and gas industry in Texas, but also to the economic success of a number of other states and our nation as a whole. The surge in oil and gas drilling has considerably bolstered the national economy, attracting more than $120 billion in U.S.-based investments and contributing $283 billion to the gross domestic product. That was in 2012. Additionally, and I think this is one of the most important statistics and one I don't think we dwell on enough. Additionally, studies project that the U.S. trade deficit will fall by more than $164 billion in 2020. That's the equivalent of about 1/3 of the current trade deficit. If you take into account that and the increase in production we've already had, decrease in exports, that is knocked about half off of what the projected trade deficit would be at that point in time. And I think that is extremely important to the economy of the country. However, to continue on this path of prosperity, we must enact policies that protect the environment while allowing the natural resource production that is vital to our country. And as I'm sure you know, the lesser prairie chicken was not an isolated incident. This isn't the first attempt to use the ESA to shut down production in Texas, and I highly doubt it will be the last. Last year, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service announced that listing the dune sagebrush lizard was not warranted after months of hearings, that the science was faulty, and receiving hundreds of comments opposed to the listing. In fact, the agency reviewed some 800 written comments and 150 comments from individuals or organizations at a 2-day public hearing. I think only 30 of those supported listing the lizard. They made the right call. Unfortunately, now that decision is being challenged in the courts. And it doesn't stop there. Wouldn't you know that the feds have found a lizard in trouble in the Eagleford as well? Coincidence? I don't think so. This time it's the spot-tailed earless lizard that just so happens to find its home in South Texas, right smack in the middle of the booming Eagleford shale. In May of 2011, the Fish and Wildlife Service determined that a petition filed by a radical environmental group presented substantial scientific evidence indicating that listing the spot-tailed earless lizard may be warranted. Which brings me to my next issue of contention with the Endangered Species Act, which is the funding behind these efforts to list certain species as endangered. For example, the petition to list the dune sagebrush lizard was originally filed by Wild Earth Guardians, a known radical environmental group. Interestingly, this group collected more than about $700,000 in taxpayer money from Fish and Wildlife between 2007 and 2011. During that period of time, the group sued the federal agency 76 times over alleged environmental violations. By filing an outlandish number of lawsuits, groups like the Wild Earth Guardians are trying to overwhelm federal resources and force settlements that they can dictate. I think you're all starting to hear a lot about sue and settle. Regardless of where you are on the policy spectrum, I think we can all agree that it's bad policy for rules and regulations to be made in backroom deals between NGOs and their ideological allies in the current administration. That's the type of thing that ought to be done by elected officials in the light of day. Such groups are willing to use extreme tactics to pursue their goal of shutting down the oil and gas industry with blatant disregard as to how those actions are going to affect the economy, or the electric power supply on which we all depend to stay warm on days like we've had recently or cool in the summer. We must not stand for that. We must not let the federal government gain control over oil and gas regulation. It will cripple the industry and cripple our economy. We must keep regulation of Texas natural resources in Texas by Texans who appreciate the importance of the oil and gas industry so that the regulatory climate remains fair, steady, and predictable. But it's not enough just to call for state primacy. You know, it's one thing, I can stand up here and grandstand all day and say we must keep the federal government out. It's another thing to understand that in order to keep the federal government out, we must have a fully funded, fully staffed railroad commission doing their job of protecting the groundwater and the health and safety of the people of Texas, as well as protecting the jobs, the tax base, and the economic vitality of our state. Yes, sometimes it is a difficult balancing act, but we can and we will do it. As a Texas Railroad Commissioner, that is my job. As the senior energy regulator in our nation's top energy producing state, I pledge to do everything in my power to protect the most important economic generator in Texas. Thank you all.
I do certainly agree that George Mitchell should have been on that 10 people that have changed the nation. I think certainly rightly so. I know Cyrus, he still bemoans the fact that he had to get his PhD at UT and not Texas Tech. It's a shame that he's not able to do that. Just think where your life would be now if you'd gone to Tech instead of UT. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But if y'all, if y'all have been in the oil and gas industry very long at all, you'll remember that Texas Monthly ran an article. Matter of fact, it was on the front page of their magazine, July 1983, when they were saying that the party's over. The oil and gas industry is, the Permian Basin's played out. You better go sell Amway, find another way to make a living, because you're not going to do it in the oil and gas industry today. And as David just said, just look at us now. You know, if you take the total Permian Basin, it is the second largest operating field in the world, just behind Saudi Arabia today as we go. So it is just amazing how we've been able to go from July 1983 to 2014 and have the robust, and I say, and I'm very proud of the industry with the steps they have taken to continue to try to create that balance that you were talking about. It's the environmental balance, just the citizens of Texas balance, and we all know that we made some missteps in around the shale up around the DFW area, the Barnett, when all that started. Urban drilling was a new concept, a new facet. Nobody really knew what to do about it, and there were some problems that arose from that. But I am here to tell you that we have learned. Matter of fact, David led a consortium down in the Eagle Ford on trying to get ahead of the curve as the Eagle Ford was beginning to show its vast play, that we didn't go in and do the same things that we had done in the Barnett. So I really feel that we try to learn from our mistakes. It is my job, my committee's job, the legislature's job to make sure that the balance between the environmental well-being of our state, of our citizens, plus the production that we enjoy and the fruits of everybody's labor in the oil and gas industry, certainly buoying the economy of Texas, certainly. I've been around a long time, like a lot of y'all have, but I've never seen an industry like the oil and gas industry that raises all ships. I mean, it is an amazing tentacles that the oil and gas industry has that will help the economy when the oil and gas industry is going great guns, which is we are enjoying today. With that boom, we have issues, as you might expect. Roads, we addressed some of that this last session on the energy roads, on how to help our counties in that respect, try to keep ahead of the curve on maintenance, and try to handle the heavy truck traffic that this boom is promulgating in their counties. And I think we did a good job there, working with TxDOT and having the counties have some money to be able to do that, and actually not just for short-term, but for long-term maintenance also. I have the honor of being also on natural resources, as Josiah said, and water and oil and gas production will always be joined at the hip. And we have which is really yet to be a new field, which is really yet to be even, it's still in the maiden stage, the Klein Shale, which is out in our part of the world, and even in good times, there's not water, or enough water, anybody thinks, out in that part of West Texas. And so we're going to have to deal with that, but again, the industry understands the importance of getting away from fresh water in the process and going to brackish water. The Railroad Commission and the Environmental Commission has been able to go together where the producers now don't have to label their water as waste, thank you, a waste stream that they, in their production, they can keep it on their area there and reuse it in their production, which is, I think, a tremendous step forward in that regard. And matter of fact, the industry is trying to get away from water altogether. There are test wells now out using propane and other types of material to get away from water altogether. So the oil and gas industry is very well aware of the water issue and how to try to get away from that as far as part of their production. Now, it's geology. Some areas, some drilling areas, you can get away from water altogether, or you can reuse. There's brackish water reservoirs underneath it. Some there's not. So you can't, that wide paintbrush doesn't work because, again, it's all depending on location and where you are in that respect. But I think that the entire industry certainly knows the importance of using brackish and reuse of water and anything that they can do to get away from fresh water. So that's, I guess, one of the main issues that we have. We also, my foundry, my real world job, we have iron foundries. We have the unfortunate position to be in the west zone of the PUs of ERCOT. And that is an issue going on right now that congestion charges are huge compared to even usage charges. And sometimes my congestion charges, and this is for an iron foundry, sometimes my congestion charges are more than my usage, which is not very economically, it's not the, you know, it hinders you as far as economic development and that kind of thing. So that's something that we're going to have to deal with as we go forward, and that's not an easy. I know the PUC is having that discussion as we speak, but that's an issue that we will have to take seriously because it will impede the economics of our state if we can't come to grips with how to deal with the congestion out of the west zone. Because if decline comes on, it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better as far as that goes, as far as that situation goes. You know, the interim, we'll be looking at new federal regulations on methane and how that's going to affect our state and our production and how we deal with that issue. We are promulgating rules right now for pipeline, for lines out in the rural, especially the rural parts of our state. And hopefully the Railroad Commission, which hadn't had that authority in the past, now will be looking at all lines, oil and gas in our state. And that's, we're going through the rural survey, really, process right now on that. The latest, and Commissioner Porter got a certainly more understanding on that, is our trimmers. Where we're going with disposal wells, how we're going to have to deal with that. I think from the concern, obviously, and conversations I've had with the industry and certainly with the citizens around our area, that there is enough going on that we will have to look at that. We'll have to see, try to get down to the bottom of what is creating, what is causing, and what we can do. And I just heard the other day that y'all are looking for a geologist, which I think is a seismologist, which I think is a great step in that regard. I think it's going to have to be certainly part of the permitting process and as we go forward, because again, it's I think the sheer volume of what's going on today. And we're going to have to look and see why it is, what it is, and assure the citizens of Texas that we are not, I was going to say hiding our head in the sand, I guess that'd be tough, but anyway, that we're ignoring the problem, that we're out there trying to get out in front of it, like, as we did disclosure on fracking, disclosure of fracking fluid. So I think Texas steps up to the bat. I think we in the oil and gas industry understand the importance of this balance that we try to keep. And I know that as we go forward, the importance of the economics and everything that's going with the jobs, just the great boom that we are experiencing and enjoying right now, we have to make sure that it continues, but it continues in the right way where we don't harm more than what we're trying to handle. So that's just some of the interim studies. There's going to be probably some other things too, but those are certainly some important things that come to light. And we'll continue to go on and as we handle and you know, not we ain't said anything about green, you you know, the solar, the wind, which is out there too. And the battery, I'll just say this real quickly on wind. I think I'm hearing this right, but there's and it's a company out of Austin, and I'm sorry, I don't know it offhand, but they have a wind farm now in Goldthwaite, Mills County. And this is the first time that the wind energy, or this wind farm has been able to experiment with batteries, with storage. Now, when wind can economically come up with a battery that will store energy, we've really got something there. I mean, we've got it, it's helping now with the lines we have through our state, but I think once we can, with R&D and cross that threshold of being able to store energy with our wind farms, that's going to be a huge boon to the energy sector in and of itself, so, and to the state especially. So we're looking forward to that. I think R&D is very, very good and going, it is alive and well in Texas, and we just need to make sure that we continue to have the atmosphere to herd that along. Thank you.
Can you hear me? I'm not going to do the PowerPoint presentation because I think given the nice discussion we're having, PowerPoints kind of take away from that. Even though I had some really pretty colors. But I don't come from the perspective. I have a different perspective than Commissioner Porter. I don't see the federal government as the problem. I don't see them as the solution either, frankly. I think the real problem is the cumulative impact of all this development, and we've got to deal with it. And so I had a nice PowerPoint presentation called Boom and Gloom, and I think we've talked about the boom side, but I wanted to, economic development, yes, is occurring. Jobs are occurring. Property taxes and sales tax are occurring. There's no doubting that. There have been some regulatory improvements. We know that Chairman Keffer worked very hard to get a disclosure bill. We didn't think it was perfect, but it was a good step forward. We've got some new legislation on pipeline safety in rural areas, Class 1 areas, that Railroad Commission is going to start working on soon. We've incorporated the enforcement guidelines into our rules, which I think is important for transparency for everyone. We have new cementing and casing regulations at Railroad Commission, long overdue, but
I think that's
very key. Again, there were certain aspects we would have liked to see a little stronger, but it was definitely a good step. The TCQ has adopted a new permit by rule for Barnett Shell area and some new maintenance startup shutdown requirements, which I think are good. Again, Sierra Club perspective, there were some other things we would have liked to have seen, but there were good steps. I think there's improvements. TCQ, part of the TCQ sunset was to transfer some responsibility of a Railroad Commission in terms of the groundwater determination. I think it makes a lot of sense to have it at one agency. That's good. You guys gave them a bunch of new money for technology, new technology. That's important. And more money for inspectors and pipeline safety. That's important too. So I think we have made some progress.
Let's just cut it right there.
But there's some gloom, right? Whether everyone in this room likes it or not, we do have clean air requirements that the state needs to meet. And while a large majority, a significant part of that ozone problem in our cities is caused by cars and trucks, some of which are related to oil and gas, there is an impact on all that development around Dallas and that development around San Antonio that does lead to air quality issues in summer months. So I think we're going to have to deal with that. Now, of course, part of these lawsuits, we're still waiting for the EPA to make a final determination on what they're going to do on ozone, whether they're going to lower it or not. But assuming at some point they do, we're going to have to probably deal with those things. That's important. I know that Commissioner Porter a few years ago said we need to relook at our venting and flaring rules. I agree. We need to relook at them. There's actually, Railroad Commission has has part of that jurisdiction in the initial kind of completion of the well. Definitely, they're the folks in charge. But TCEQ also has a role once you have production going in terms of venting and flaring. I had some nice charts I got from their website, but it basically showed, well, it's a tiny percentage, less than about 0.6 of, less than 1% that's flared or vented. It has been going up the last few years, and the number of permits, and a lot of this is in Eagleford where they're burning off the gas to get to the oil, but it went from 651 permits in 11 to 1963 and 12 to over 3,013. So that's a lot of product that's most of it's being flared, so it's a small percentage that's getting into the atmosphere, but some is getting, and some is being vented, and I see that as a problem. So it's not good for air quality. Roads, I said, torn up and killing folks, because some people are dying. There are accidents, particularly in South Texas, but in other areas as well. And more money is needed. The decision by TxDOT to turn to gravel roads, I think, hasn't worked. I don't know what your guys' opinion on that is, but I think they're already kind of torn up from what I've seen. So that's an issue we need to deal with, and we need better planning on transportation. And if you probably read the stories about, around Catella or some of those areas where it's become almost like a superhighway. There's so much traffic. Part of that, maybe if we can get some of these, pipelines for salt water, you won't need as much trucks to carry that stuff, but the trucks too have impacts. So that's a problem. Water, I think in the future, technology will help us. But right now, it's still unclear how much water is being used in fracking. There was a San Antonio Express News study that found that water use in the Eagleford was about 45,000 acre-feet per year. Again, not a huge percentage in terms of total water use, but still significant. But that was already more than was being projected in a UT study for that area. So today, more water was being used than the UT study was projecting for 10 years in the future. So that means, Teresa Wilcox, local aquifers, it's a problem because it's not like, we always talk about how much water is used in coal plants and nuke plants, and we should go towards more efficient use of water. But the fact is, most of that water does get back in the hydrological cycle. If your ultimate destination of that water is to stick it into injection wells, you're losing it out of the hydrological cycle. So that's important. So there are things we probably could do in terms of both better water use reporting, but also, maybe time to give clear rules to groundwater districts on how they permit water use. So those are some things we could work on. Enforcement, inspections, and data. I'm not a really cheery guy, am I? Sorry. Enforcement, inspection, I'm not running for office, I don't need to be. We think fees and fines are too low at the Railroad Commission, and I understand they have a different way of dealing with things. They have, different tools than TCEQ does in terms of telling people if you don't comply with the rules, we'll just turn off the spigot. I understand all that, but I still think it's time to look at those daily fines, those maximum daily fines of $10,000, which were set in 1983, and bring them up to 2013 levels. So EPA, TCEQ, Attorney General here, 25,000 is maximum fine per day per violation. We probably should do the same with the Railroad Commission. I've talked about with Chairman Kefren and others, with all this money they got for improvement of technology, and some of this you can do already, but hopefully we'll come to a time when you can actually search online and see which companies are doing a good job in terms of compliance and which have some problems. Because I think transparency helps everybody and will lead to better operators. Injection wells, Railroad Commission deserves some credit that they opened up a rulemaking, I think it was a year or so ago, to look at the rules for injection wells. Given these, given all the concern, and I don't know if I can call it evidence yet, but at least correlation with tremors and earthquakes, you know, it may be time to consider that you have to do some pre-drilling analysis of potential seismic impacts at the beginning, and you deal with that problem up front. You know, prevention's better than whatever I'm trying to say. It's better to prevent these earthquakes than deal with them afterwards, obviously. 34,000 active disposal wells in all of Texas, according to their website. You know, a much smaller amount are large commercial ones, but there's a lot of injection of waste in Texas, and cumulatively, each individual one probably isn't a problem, but cumulatively it may be in certain areas. So we should do more on that. Pipeline safety, we've already discussed that, but there is still this issue of how we do the what's that called? You know, the license, the permitting of pipelines, the T4 form, how we just make an assumption that someone's a common carrier. The legislature looked at that issue. There was no resolution, but we probably have to deal with that issue. And I'll throw out. I've been told by my Sierra Club organization that I can't call it climate change anymore because it doesn't sell well. I have to call it climate disruption. So I'm calling it climate disruption. I'm just saying what works. I'm just being honest. I think it's real. I think the climate is, as you can see, is very varied, and oil and gas is part of that. I mean, coal is certainly a bigger factor, but the benefits of the natural gas, the conversion to natural gas as our primary electric source, are undermined by these leaks, by these methane and other leaks, vents and flares. So we should be looking at best practices, practicing, improving, you know, moving towards green completions. Look at those pneumatic devices. EDF, I think to their credit, is doing some good science, some good studies of, you know, really where are these methane leaks? And a lot of it is just in the pneumatic devices and the valves. It's not really in the initial drilling or the actual hydrofracking process. So I think we got to look at how do we improve that and prevent a lot of those leaks, because it's a waste of the resource, and it's also not good for the environment. So that's I won't talk about endangered species because I probably have a different perspective on that. I think the purpose is to protect species, not shut down the industry. But I think there's a way to get there without. I think you can do both. So that's all I'll say.
All right, well, one of the great things about TPPF and policy orientation is that we have a very knowledgeable audience, a very engaged audience. So we'd like to hear from you if you have questions for the panelists. And we have a microphone right here. So if you just wait for the microphone, we'll start with that gentleman over there.
Okay, I'm from Houston, and I have an oil and gas related business, but in light of the recent drought, I am curious about the water. You talk about brackish water. I'm interested, where does that come from? And when you inject it in injection wells, what is the risk of contaminating the water table with the injection well? I mean, it stays brackish when it goes down, and I'm sure it stays brackish for the rest of its life, right? Well, is there a possibility that it can affect the groundwater at some point?
We are blessed with reservoirs of brackish water. That's why I said a minute ago, it's geology and location where you are. If you're blessed with that kind of ability there to be able to, and they're deeper normally than your freshwater reservoirs with more cost and drilling, but they're there. And we're talking about reuse, being able to, if you're around that area, you can reuse that water in your production. I feel with the new pipeline safety cementing rules that the railroad commissioners came out with, that Cyrus said they're good, didn't go far enough, maybe, but certainly I feel like we are on top of the safety aspect of the dam hole, and has brought it up to the 21st century, and you know, I mean, I'm never going to say never, I'm never going to say it could never be done, but I do feel that the oil and gas industry and regulators of the state of Texas are And as Cyrus said, we talked about tremors now, disposal wells, volume. I think that's another aspect, another level that we're not looking at. I do feel we're on top of the situation.
I think there was, gentleman back there.
I'd like to direct my question to Commissioner Porter. Commissioner Porter, my friends in North Dakota keep telling me that they're going to be #1 in oil production in 2015. Is that true? And if it is, we've been #1 in oil production for over 100 years. Why should I vote for you in 2016 if you can't keep us #1?
That is not true. There is no way North Dakota is going to surpass Texas in oil production, period, in my opinion, and certainly no way in the next year. So that isn't going to happen. I think percentage-wise, and North Dakota, the Bakken has been a phenomenal increase in production over the last few years. But what's even more amazing is I think recent statistics show the Eagle Ford at or surpassing the Bakken in total production, and that's just our #2 area.
And if you're from Dakota, what else you gonna say?
Sir, there.
I'd like to address this to Mr. Reed, and it does have to do with the endangered species. And I'd like to know what your group has done in regard to making sure that the situation that happened in the Northwest with the spotted owl, which ruined an industry, the timber industry, and we found out now that it was not the timber industry, but it was another species that was killing the spotted owl. How are we going to prevent that from happening again?
I'll first say my ignorance. I don't know a lot about the spotted owl situation. Not having, whenever that happened, I wasn't involved in this line of work, so I don't know a lot about it. We're certainly generally supportive of Endangered Species Act. I guess we're one of those radical environmental groups that on occasion have sued. We were involved here in Texas in a pretty big case with San Antonio and their aquifer use. I think it had a good result because what it forced San Antonio to do is really look at their water use, to keep those spring levels up. And so they're probably the poster child now of cities who've done a good job on water conservation. So, it can have some good impacts as well as helping to keep species around. Now I'm trying to get to your question. I think there have been some positive developments in that there's less, we're having less cases where Endangered Species Act is used in a way that you have to get a takings permit every time you try to develop, and instead we're moving more towards habitat conservation plans where you kind of set the boundaries for what development is allowed in the first place, and I think that's probably makes a lot more sense. So I don't have a problem with the state of Texas trying to get involved in either the dune lizard or the prairie chicken and come up with a habitat conservation plan. I do think we need to make sure all stakeholders are involved. It shouldn't certainly just be the comptroller and oil and gas industry. It should be a bunch of state agencies that are involved in that decision making, including Railroad Commission. But I think that's the way to go, is you move more towards a plan that's implemented and kind of sets out what's allowed, rather than try to do individual taking permits and have legal fights about it.
I see one right there.
Thank you. I listened to Mr. Reed's comments on flaring going up, and I'm wondering, Commissioner Porter, what are the impediments, if any, for an operator to do the obvious, which is those hydrocarbons that are being flared have economic value that's going up in smoke, literally, and put in a mobile generator, generate power from that and hook it into the grid. What are the regulatory and other impediments to that happening?
That is a good point, and there are a lot of regulatory impediments, unfortunately, to that happening, from the radical environmental groups have a lot of air emission rules that make it very expensive to have a lot of the small generation out, sites in the field to make use of that. So that's one of the difficulties that industry faces when they do that. There's so many ways, there's not one silver bullet to answer that whole question. There are a whole lot of different things that impact on it. The common carrier situation, pipelines, the more pipelines you have built, the less flaring you're gonna have. That's the main reason why long-term gas is flared, is because they're producing the oil and they don't have a pipeline there to sell the gas to market. So there are a lot of different factors that impact on that. Right now, one of the things that we're doing at the commission and getting ready to do is, we've had a massive technology upgrade that we're finally in the process of doing now with our computer system, and quite frankly, we haven't had the systems to enforce a lot of the, to easily get the records and enforce a lot of the permits and various rules and regulations at the commission, partly because of database and those kind of problems. We've had to do a lot of things manually that quite frankly should have been spit out by the computer in just a few minutes, and would literally take hours and days of staff time to run lists and look at violations. So that's one of the things by our upgrade we'll hopefully be able to solve a number of those problems in the next year and a half.
All right, I think there was one in the back there. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to ask a question about the earthquake phenomenon that we've heard about. And Commissioner Porter, thank you for being here. You've talked about hiring a seismologist. We don't really have any data that establishes any real correlation. And so I'm kind of wondering sort of where we're headed with that. And Chairman Keffer, I want to know, would you see this something that would happen via rulemaking, or would you want to have testimony on a bill? And sort of where do we see this? Because when I hear people talk about wanting to have a test or a regulation or a study on an effect we're not sure is occurring, I have some concerns. So I'd be interested in your views on that.
I don't see it as, I would think it would be rulemaking within the Railroad Commission. I don't see a bill per se, but I do feel that the angst and the concern is enough out there that we do talk about it publicly, and all parties, as Cyrus has said, all parties there at the table to make sure that, and using UT, the geologic Bureau of Economics. I mean, they, I remember Scott saying at one time that there's no place in Texas that is not in a fracture zone. I mean, that's a geologic fact. And we just have to now, take that, and you're going to be being able to connect the data here, coming up with their new system and be able to extract that data from UT, which I think is going to be extremely helpful. So I think it's just, I don't see legislation per se. I just think that as, I just think it's out there, and it happens now frequently enough, and there's that much concern, and there's that much gray area that just to talk about it and see what we can do, and if that's going to be part of the permitting process now, how to make that economical. I mean, again, all you're doing is adding cost to everything you do. However, you got to weigh it. It's that balance we've been talking about, keeping production going versus the safety and the known, the known and the unknown. I look at it.
As I mentioned, the Railroad Commission did open a rulemaking on injection wells, and had a couple things on injection wells and hydrogen sulfide, something on hydrogen. There was a number of parts, but I think even within the context of that rulemaking, because they haven't acted on it now, you could at least explore the potential for what additional steps would be needed to be protective. So I think it can be done through regulation.
All right, and another question there in the back.
Thank you. This would go to Commissioner Porter. Just got a question. I'm just looking at, you've got excess gas. It's obviously one thing to build a pipeline. You still have to have a demand for it when it gets to the other end. But what I was curious about, have y'all looked, as the commission, looked at the possibility of taking gas to liquids to make Fischer-Tropsch fuels? Because you're dealing in an area where you have a shortage of water, you know, diesel, you know, it's ultra low sulfur diesel that they come up with the FT fuel, and give some kind of a credit back to the oil companies if you take the gas that you have, create GTL. You know, the diesel yields about 80%. Sasol's building a plant in Louisiana currently. They announced they're building 2 plants there. And I'm just simply saying, while we need the liquids, we could replace the oil, give them an incentive to replace the water by putting ultra low sulfur diesel down the hole. And at the same token, you've got gas that's being flared. For God's sakes, you've got to be able to figure out some way to make, you know, for 8,500 cubic feet, you can turn it to a barrel of diesel. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that's, you know, not as cheap as water, I'm sure, as a frac deal. But the reality is it cannot, if you're dealing with pure FD fuels, you cannot damage the environment with it. I mean, I've actually carried a barrel into Congress. We drank it because it's EPA approved, and I don't think it hurt them, but look at some of the legislation that's occurred. Maybe I did more damage there than I thought I did, but the reality is it's something y'all might want to look at. You might want to look at. I'm just saying is because you've got the need of liquids, you've got excess gas. It looks like to me it might be a real natural solution. And I understand it's cheaper probably to produce crude oil, diesel from crude. But the reality is you've got the gas being flared. There's something could be done, it looks like.
I mean, number one, there's several things I can respond. Number one, we do not have the jurisdiction to give out incentives, with, you know, the Railroad Commission by regulation. Secondly, you know, you're right, there do need to be increased markets for natural gas. And one of the things we're working on at the Commission, incentive for natural gas vehicles, we're working on that, encouraging that both for a market viewpoint, from an economic viewpoint, what it would mean in the state of Texas. And also there are some environmental benefits. The more you move the fleet from an oil-based to a natural gas-based fuel, it does cut some emissions, particularly in non-attainment in the large cities with fleets. The more you produce electricity from natural gas, instead of other options, it you know, uses gas. The gas liquefaction is a big deal as far as exporting natural gas if you want to stop flaring. So those are all practical things that are all part of the solution. And that's all I can say on that.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I think there's one there, and then you'll be the last question.
Quick question, Mr. Porter, you were going to say something about the Hazel situation and it was cut off. Would you share what you were going to say?
Basically, you know, what I think we need to do is look at the sound science and the hard evidence of what is going out there. And there are a lot of people, whether they're right or whether they're wrong, really think something's going on. And I think it behooves us that are elected officials to look at it. And quite honestly, and Cyrus will say this is my paranoia of the federal government, but I would like for us in Texas to make sure we really look at this issue, both at the commission, make sure that we find out what is going on, what is happening, what needs to be done, rather than the federal government haphazardly coming in here and imposing a solution that may be incorrect just based on what they think is going on, and that we would do a vital damage to the most important industry in the state and not have anything helped as far as what's going on or maybe going on as far as what's causing the seismic activity. I really think that's a job that needs to be done in Texas by Texans.
And I think it was Joseph Heller who said, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. All right, final question.
Hi, I'm Andrew Miller. I'm the British Consul General. A question for the panel, which is around the economic benefits of exporting hydrocarbons from the US and Texas. Commissioner Porter, you mentioned the trade balance benefits of it. We've talked about a resource which has seen the prices compressed quite low here in Texas over the past few years. There's a large amount of demand in the UK and Europe for natural gas. I wonder if the panel could comment on what Texas as a state is doing to promote LNG exports.
At the commission, we're not directly involved in export promotion, and nothing on LNG right now. I'd certainly, I am encouraging that. I think the governor's office, and I hate to speak for them, but I think they've been working on a number of issues to promote that type of thing too. So I think there has been some promotion going on by Texas state agencies.
I think we have our first license, and I do feel, you know, I just think it's a no-brainer that the permitting process is slow, and but I do feel it's our piece of the puzzle, but it's so vast, the market or what you could do. I mean, in our supply, and to get it up and running. I mean, we're way behind the curve on that anyway. And getting the fleet, I mean, there's all the mechanics you know to get it there. And then you have, I think, the political issue of some oil and gas producers around the world not wanting us playing in that arena. I think there's going to be a lot of political issues. The more we are advancing the export of natural gas, we run into other arenas. But I still feel it's certainly a big piece of the puzzle to be able to do.
I mean, directly, we do not permit the LNG plants as far as the commission's concerned. We have some involvement in the permitting up to the pipelines going into the plant, but not the plant itself. That's federal government level as far as those export permits.
I think Sierra Club fought the LNG imports, and I think we're now fighting the LNG exports, so I'll just leave it at that.
There you go. They're consistent.
Yeah. All right, well, I'd like to thank our panelists for a great